The sun had barely cleared the rooftops of Eastwood when Alice Green pulled her battered Honda Civic into the empty lot at the end of Brooklyn Street. She stepped onto cracked concrete, clipboard in hand, and surveyed the block. Patched potholes where wildflowers now poked through, a sagging chain-link fence spray-painted with gang tags, and three derelict stoops littered with broken glass. Once a vibrant corridor of row houses and mom-and-pop shops, Brooklyn Street had fallen into despair, and Alice intended to change that. At 28, Alice had already earned her reputation as a tenacious urban planner. Armed with a master's degree in community development and a spark of idealism, she spent the past 2 years helping neighborhoods across the city secure small grants for pocket parks and mural projects. But now she was home, determined to breathe life into the very street where she'd learned to ride her bike and sell lemonade at age 7. Her first order of business was a neighborhood meeting. By mid-morning, she'd posted hand-painted flyers on every lamppost. Brooklyn Street Revival, Tuesday, 6 p.m. in the church hall. As dusk fell, 60 residents, Black, Latino, Asian, and white, crammed into the cramped parish hall of St. Augustine's Church. Folding chairs creaked under grandparents, young families, and two skeptical white homeowners in pressed dress shirts. At the front, Alice clicked on a PowerPoint projected against a folding screen. Phase 1. Streetscape Renewal. 150,000 community grant, flashed over a before and after rendering of the block, transformed by decorative pavers, tree-lined sidewalks, and clustered planter beds brimming with native flowers. She outlined her vision in precise detail. Decorative granite pavers, replacing cracked asphalt, $50,000. 4 solar-powered streetlights to banish shadows and deter crime, $30,000. Raised planter beds at each corner for community gardening, $20,000. Commissioned mural walls by local artists celebrating the block's history, $15,000. Funding for a block party finale. Food trucks, children's workshops, and live music, $25,000. Administrative and volunteer support. In-kind labor valued at $10,000. As she spoke, Alice passed around glossy mock-ups, a robin egg blue paver pattern, sketches of sunflowers climbing stoop walls, and a blueprint for a wood slat bench circling a newly planted oak tree. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some faces lit with hope, others furrowed in skepticism. When she invited questions, Mrs. Ramirez, a longtime resident whose storefront once sold homemade candles, stood trembling. But who's going to pay for upkeep? Last time they fixed the sidewalk, it crumbled within months. Alice nodded earnestly. Maintenance will be built into the grant. Local volunteers trained to tend planters, and a line item for seal coating pavers every 5 years. Plus, a block association fund co-managed by residents to ensure nothing falls into disrepair. A young couple, the Lees, raised concerns about traffic flow once the street narrowed for planters. Alice clicked to a traffic-calming slide. Gentle curb bulbs at intersections, clearly marked crosswalks, and a volunteer walking school bus escort for children. The Lees exchanged glances, then nodded. But not everyone was convinced. From the back, Mr. Callahan and Mrs. Whitmore, 2 white homeowners in the upscale new townhouse development, crossed their arms. "We're fine with gardens," Mrs. Whitmore said coolly, "but we don't want our property values threatened by a block party. Noise, crowds, no thanks." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Alice paused, meeting their gaze without flinching. "I understand the concerns, but this isn't just a party. It's a strategic investment. Better streetscape means safer sidewalks, more customers for local shops, and increased home values for all. We'll schedule the block party to end by 10 p.m., use directional sound barriers, and devote $2,000 of the grant to noise mitigation panels." The white homeowners exchanged a terse nod, unconvinced but silent. In the tense hush that followed, Alice felt the true challenge crystallize. Not only securing the $150,000 grant, but navigating the unspoken resistance of those who saw change as a threat. As the meeting adjourned, she watched hopeful neighbors linger to sign a petition committing their homes and labor. Outside, the night air felt charged, an electric promise that this block, long abandoned to neglect and vandalism, would soon rise again under a beacon of community vision. and that the fight for Brooklyn Street's soul was only just beginning. 2 weeks before the grant deadline, Alice Green arrived at her favorite coffee shop, her laptop open, data spreadsheets and design mock-ups laid out. But the usual hum of optimism felt off. Her inbox still showed no submission received confirmation from the city grants portal. Confused, she logged in again. Her application for the $150,000 Brooklyn Street Revitalization Grant was marked inactive, pending complaints. Pending complaints? Alice whispered, glancing around the crowded cafe. She clicked through the system alerts. 6 anonymous objections had flooded the portal in as many hours, citing excessive noise, traffic disruptions, and inappropriate neighborhood events. Each complaint listed a phony address on Brooklyn Street. No party belongs here. Keep our block quiet. Alarmed, Alice dashed through the midday heat back to the block. Along the sidewalk, she found torn posters for last week's community meeting. Ripped scraps of colorful flyer littered the grass. Nearby, someone had vandalized the new Brooklyn Street Revival sign she'd installed on her front lawn. The words scrawled over in red spray paint read, "Go home." Her heart pounded. For generations, Brooklyn Street's white-owned townhouse association had quietly governed every community process, from potlucks to parking permits. Now they wielded bureaucracy as a weapon. Alice stormed into the neighborhood convenience store, where Mrs. Lopez, the shop owner, shook her head. Mrs. Lopez. They've been calling City Hall all morning, complaining about a loud black activist project, they said. Alice. Do you know who? Mrs. Lopez. A group of high-heeled ladies in expensive suits. Kensington Row, they called themselves. Alice realized the stakes. Without resolving these complaints, her grant application would remain in limbo, and the block's first signs of renewal would be vanquished by the same neighbors who'd benefited from the street's neglect. That evening, she convened a crisis meeting with her co-planner, Karim Hassan, and a handful of committed residents at the local community center. Under the flickering fluorescent lights, Alice laid out the complaints log and the vandal photos. Karim, they've weaponized the complaint process. We need to flood the portal with counter support. Real emails, real addresses, signed petitions. Alice nodding. And we must document the vandalism as evidence of their pattern. Break-ins, torn flyers, stolen signs. If we can show the city this isn't community concern, but targeted sabotage, they can't ignore us. They drafted an urgent action plan. Collect affidavits from homeowners and renters affirming support. Photographically, document every instance of vandalism with time-stamped shots. Flood the grants portal with 100 letters of endorsement before midnight. Engage local media to highlight the sabotage story as a civil rights issue. As midnight neared, Alice's email pinged with support letters. Dozens poured in from neighbors, both black and white, each declaring their enthusiasm for the revitalization project. She uploaded the affidavits and photos, responding point by point to each complaint. Calmer sound barrier plans, staggered delivery schedules, and a promise to end the block party at 10 p.m. sharp. When she hit resubmit just before the portal closed, Alice exhaled, exhausted but resolute. The white neighbor pushback had cast a dark shadow, but it had also galvanized her community's true voice. In the struggle against engineered sabotage, Alice knew they'd found their first victory. Unity born of resistance, and the fighting spirit that would carry them forward to reclaim Brooklyn Street's future. By mid-morning, Alice sat hunched over her kitchen table, pouring through the city's online grant portal. The standard Community Revitalization Fund was now out of reach, locked by the bogus complaints. But buried deep in the guidelines, she discovered a second opportunity. The Urban Resilience and Anti-Vandalism Emergency Fund, earmarked for neighborhoods suffering repeated property damage or graffiti. Unlike the general grant, this one required immediate evidence of vandalism, exceeding 3 incidents in 6 months, and promised up to $150,000 for security lighting, durable street furniture, and community art projects to deter tagging. Alice's pulse quickened. Brooklyn Street qualified, but she needed to prove it. She grabbed her camera and rallied Karim Hassan, and 2 volunteers, Marisol and Tony. Within hours, they canvassed the block, capturing high-resolution geotagged photographs of every broken window, every concrete bloomed with spray paint, every uprooted sapling. They documented 20 separate acts of vandalism in the past 3 months alone, each image time-stamped and overlaid on a detailed map of the street's 12 houses. Next, Alice secured official backing. She contacted Sergeant Lopez at the 12th Precinct, who verified 23 logged vandalism calls in the district and provided an excerpted police report confirming gang-style tagging and unauthorized property damage. With permission, Alice included redacted copies of those reports in her submission packet. That afternoon, she convened a stoop-side interview with Ms. Tran, the Vietnamese grandmother whose flower beds had been trampled twice. Leaning on her cane, Ms. Tran recounted her fear of walking outside after dusk. Alice recorded the testimony, voice memo and signed affidavit, emphasizing the human toll, diminished sense of safety, loss of neighborhood pride, and the psychological scars of repeated defacement. Back at her apartment, Alice organized a digital folder. Photo Exhibit A. 20 numbered geotagged images of damage, windows, fences, walls, trees. Map Exhibit B. GIS overlay of incidents plotted along Brooklyn Street. Police Exhibit C. Certified logs of 23 reported vandalism calls. Affidavit Exhibit. First-person statements from 5 residents, including Ms. Tran. Support Exhibit. 20-page petition with resident signatures, pledging volunteer maintenance and community watch patrols. Karim drafted the narrative cover letter, weaving these exhibits into a compelling case. Brooklyn Street has endured an epidemic of targeted vandalism, degrading both property and community cohesion. This emergency grant will fund 6 high-intensity LED streetlights, $40,000, 12 graffiti-resistant art panels, $25,000, 10 reinforced planter benches, $35,000, and a youth-led mural project with anti-tagging sealant, $30,000. A community watch program, backed by $20,000 in volunteer training and coordination, ensures sustainability. Late into the night, Alice refined the budget spreadsheet, matching every line item to vendor quotes and labor estimates. At 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the portal closed, she uploaded the 200-page PDF dossier, hit Submit, and watched the confirmation screen glow. Emergency grant application received. Leaning back, Alice allowed herself a moment's relief. The sabotage had pushed her to discover a grant tailored to exactly their crisis, and the dossier she'd assembled left no doubt. Brooklyn Street wasn't just seeking beautification, it was fighting for survival. Now, all that remained was to persuade the Emergency Fund Committee that this block, under assault by the very neighbors sworn to uphold order, deserved their full $150,000 lifeline. On the crisp morning of the emergency grant review, Alice Green arrived punctually at the city grants office, her portfolio bulging with evidence exhibits. In the austere hearing room, pale gray walls, a long oak table flanked by 7 committee members, she felt a familiar surge of determination. Across from her sat representatives from Public Works, Community Safety, Arts and Culture, and 3 neighborhood association liaisons, including one who wore the pristine blazer of the Kensington Row homeowners. Chairwoman Torres, a steely veteran of municipal funding rounds, rapped her gavel twice to call the meeting to order. Without preamble, she turned to Alice. Ms. Green, Chief Grants Officer Patel began in a clipped tone. You've requested $150,000 from the Urban Resilience and Anti-Vandalism Fund. We understand Brooklyn Street has documented vandalism. Please present your case. Alice exhaled, clicked her remote, and the projector flared to life with a satellite image of the block. Overlaid red dots marked the 20 acts of graffiti and property damage cataloged in the past 3 months. She held their gaze and spoke clearly. Thank you, Chairwoman and committee members. Brooklyn Street, once a vibrant, mixed-income thoroughfare, has endured an epidemic of vandalism that erodes safety and chokes commerce. In the last quarter alone, my team and I documented 20 separate incidents, corroborated by police reports, logging 23 calls for tagging and break-ins. Each red dot here represents a moment a resident felt unsafe, a storefront lost business, or a child hesitated to walk home. She advanced to Exhibit C, displaying certified excerpts from Precinct 12's logs. Then Exhibit D, a video clip of Ms. Tran's tearful testimony describing her trampled flower beds and broken windows. The panel watched in silence as Ms. Tran's words, "I can't sleep, afraid someone will strike at night," filled the room. Next, Alice pivoted to her solution, the lineup of budget slides. 6 high-intensity LED streetlights, 40,000. 12 graffiti-resistant mural panels, 25,000. 10 reinforced planter benches, 35,000. A youth-led mural and anti-tagging workshop, 30,000. Community watch program, setup and training, 20,000. She detailed each line item with vendor quotes, installation timelines, and projected maintenance schedules, tying them back to sustainability and community ownership. When Chairwoman Torres raised an eyebrow, Alice anticipated the question. "How will you ensure these investments aren't undone?" Torres asked. Alice clicked to Exhibit E, the community pledge petition signed by 82 households and a volunteer roster detailing 1,200 hours of block watch patrols and garden maintenance. We've secured binding commitments from residents, Black, Latino, and white alike, to staff nightly patrols, tend planters, and report any new vandalism immediately. Our youth muralists will apply a protective sealant that deters tagging, and the LED lighting will remain lit from dusk to dawn, discouraging illicit activity. A representative of the Arts and Culture Department, committee member Nguyen, leaned forward in approval. The mural panels also double as public art, uplifting the block's aesthetic while serving crime prevention. Excellent dual use. But the Kensington Row liaison, Mr. Fairfield, cleared his throat. What about traffic flow? Will these planters impede emergency vehicle access? Alice pulled up a detailed street section diagram. Not at all. We've designed raised planters flush with the curb line and maintained a 14-foot clear lane, exceeding the 12-foot minimum for fire and ambulance access. We coordinated every dimension with Public Works and the Fire Marshal's office, whose preliminary sign-off is attached here. As the clock ticked past the scheduled 1-hour mark, Chairwoman Torres consulted her notes. Then, with a firm nod, she closed her binder and looked up. "Ms. Green, this committee is convinced of both the severity of the vandalism and the rigor of your response plan. We vote today to award Brooklyn Street the full $150,000 from the Urban Resilience and Anti-Vandalism Fund." A hush fell, then gentle applause rippled around the room. Alice's chest tightened with relief and pride. Even Mr. Fairfield offered a reluctant smile and extended his hand in congratulations. As she gathered her exhibits and thanked each member personally, Alice sensed more than personal victory, a repudiation of sabotage, and a mandate for renewal. The city had entrusted her with a lifeline, and Brooklyn Street was poised for a transformation that would withstand both graffiti cans and quiet resistance. The real work, she knew, was just beginning. The following Monday dawned with uncharacteristic brightness over Brooklyn Street. Crews began work before sunrise, humming trucks and chattering drills, stirring the long, silent block back to life. Alice arrived just as the first sections of broken asphalt were lifted away. She walked between the workers, patting shoulders and offering bottles of water from a cooler brought by neighborhood volunteers. The air crackled with anticipation. Here, at last, was proof that the grant committee's trust was well placed. By mid-morning, the decorative granite pavers had started to arrive. Alice knelt beside the first worker, setting a shimmering stone into the sandbed, verifying its placement with a level. She watched the pavers lock together one by one, forming a smooth, uniform ribbon down the length of the street. Each stone felt like a promise kept, a pledge to safety, beauty, and community pride. Neighbors peered from their stoops, eyes bright with curiosity and cautious hope. A team led by Marisol, the longtime resident who had first brought her concerns to Alice, assembled the reinforced benches. They bolted each one firmly into the concrete footing, then tested their strength by seating themselves heavily in turn. Children clambered on the backs of benches, once too rickety to support an adult's weight. while elderly residents settled onto the broad planks, smiling in the warm sunshine. The benches were both functional and symbolic, a place to rest, to chat, to watch the block's transformation in real time. Across the street, Karim oversaw the installation of the solar-powered streetlights. He checked wiring connections and adjusted the panel's angles to capture maximum sunlight. Under his calm supervision, the lampposts rose tall and sleek. When the technician switched the first lamp on at noon for a midday test, its LED glow was surprisingly warm, casting a soft halo that lingered even beneath the sun's rays. Witnessing the light stand undefeated over daylight was a small marvel that drew applause from passing volunteers. Meanwhile, local artists gathered underneath a pair of freshly cleaned walls. With brushes in hand and protective sealant mixed into their paint, they sketched the first outlines of the community mural. The image depicted a row of row houses in bloom, children chasing kites between lampposts, and a central figure, Alice herself, standing with outstretched arms. Spectators slowed to watch each stroke, recognizing familiar faces and places woven into the design. Every color chosen and every line drawn served as an affirmation that this block belonged to its people. By late afternoon, the bulk of the heavy work was complete. The street no longer appeared abandoned. Instead, it looked like an open-air gallery or a village green, inviting, secure, and distinctly alive. As the sun dipped low, Alice led a small group down the new sidewalk to host a first-look gathering. Volunteers set out water coolers, lemonade pitchers, and trays of cookies. Children ran gleefully over the pavers, their laughter bouncing off the new benches and the pastel walls. Standing in the center of the transformed block, Alice raised her voice so everyone could hear. She spoke of the hardship they had faced, of the anonymous sabotage and the flood of false complaints. But she spoke more of resilience, of neighbors who refused to be deterred, and of the power that emerged when a community united. "This is only the beginning," she said. "Tomorrow we plant flowers in those raised planters. Next week we light these lamps at dusk. And on Friday we celebrate with a block party that will shine light on what we can achieve together." As dusk slid in and the solar lights flickered on in their scheduled test, the block glowed like a string of lanterns, outlining the boundary between past neglect and future promise. In that gentle illumination, the people of Brooklyn Street saw not only a new pavement underfoot, but a path forward, a pathway they had built with their own hands and hearts. The evening of the grand unveiling arrived with a warm, balmy breeze drifting down Brooklyn Street. As dusk settled, neighbors began to gather under the newly installed solar-powered lanterns. Alice had brought in 3 food trucks to serve barbecue, tacos, and vegetarian bowls, and a long row of folding tables held cool pitchers of lemonade and iced tea. At one end of the block, a small portable stage stood ready for performances. Local musicians kicked off the festivities with a soulful jazz quartet. Their horns and percussion echoed against the new granite pavers, drawing smiles from children who danced barefoot between tables. A high school hip-hop crew followed, rapping verses they had written about reclaiming their neighborhood. Their energy was contagious, and even the most reserved elders tapped their toes and nodded along. Along the sidewalk, dozens of painted benches hosted animated conversations. Longtime resident Mr. Delgado pointed out the new planter boxes to his granddaughter, showing her the marigolds and lavender they had planted together. Across the street, Ms. Tran beamed as she explained to a group how her once trampled flower beds now thrived under respectful stewardship. Alice moved among the crowd, greeting volunteers, thanking artisans who had contributed to the mural, and posing for photographs with families proudly holding up the petition they had signed. She paused at the mural wall, where the image of her and her neighbors stood bright against a backdrop of flowers and streetlights. A local artist applied a final coat of anti-graffiti sealant, and the crowd applauded as she stepped back, admiring the vibrant colors and intricate details. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the solar lanterns flickered on, bathing the street in a soft, golden glow. A hush fell over the crowd as Alice climbed onto the stage. She spoke of the journey they had shared, of every broken window photographed, every complaint answered, and every stone laid by volunteer hands. Her voice carried the weight of their struggle and the pride of their achievement. She invited everyone to join in a ribbon-cutting ceremony. With oversized scissors, she sliced through the bright ribbons strung across the entrance to the block. The crowd erupted in cheers, and children ran beneath the ribbon to claim the freshly paved street as their own playground. The festival continued with face-painting stations, where children transformed into butterflies and tigers, and with a craft area where families decorated small lanterns that would hang along the planters. As a local storyteller narrated folktales from different cultures represented on Brooklyn Street, neighbors old and new sat together on the benches, sharing laughter and conversation. Late into the night, the music faded to an acoustic guitar duet, while the street remained alive with joy. Neighbors lingered, reluctant to leave the place that had so recently been marred by vandalism and resistance. Under the lantern light, they saw not just a renovated street, but a renewed community, bound together by a shared vision and the belief that when people stand up for their home, no amount of sabotage can dim their light. In the weeks after the street festival, Brooklyn Street settled into its new rhythm. Morning sunlight glinted off the smooth granite pavers, and the solar lanterns still hummed through the night, guiding early joggers and late-shift workers alike. Flower boxes held aromatic lavender and marigolds, and community gardeners, rotating in pairs of volunteers, tended the beds with pride. The mural by the reinforced benches had become a local landmark, its bright images of neighborhood children and familiar row houses greeting every passerby. Alice Green convened a meeting of the Brooklyn Street Stewardship Council in the cool basement of St. Augustine's Church. The room was warm with optimism as she welcomed a dozen residents, longtimers like Mrs. Ramirez and Mr. Delgado, the Lees from the new condos, and even Mr. Fairfield and Mrs. Whitmore from Kensington Row, who had come to offer tentative congratulations. Alice presented the month's crime statistics. Vandalism incidents had dropped to 0, and local businesses reported 30% revenue increases on weekends when the street was closed to traffic. Neighbors nodded, a quiet pride in their eyes. With the emergency grant funds fully committed, the council turned to sustaining momentum. Tasha volunteered to organize monthly evening lantern walks on the first Friday of each month. Karim Hassan agreed to coordinate regular maintenance inspections with Public Works. The council agreed to allocate a small portion of the traffic ticket revenues, now up due to better enforcement, to a Brooklyn Street Reserve Fund, ensuring that paint, soil, and bulbs could be replaced without resorting to new grants. Meanwhile, Alice reflected on the saboteurs who had fought so hard to keep the street in decay. Mr. Fairfield approached her after the meeting. His posture was stiff, but his tone had lost its earlier condescension. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I apologize for the complaints. Seeing this block now, I understand what we nearly lost." Alice accepted his apology with a warm nod. "Thank you. Brooklyn Street belongs to all of us." Mrs. Whitmore added, "We've learned that change isn't a threat but an opportunity." Their contrition marked a turning point in neighborhood relations. In the months that followed, the Stewardship Council expanded its scope. They applied to the city for a pedestrian-only summer market series, offering local artisans free stalls and slotting out space for cultural performances. The block became a model for other wards. Delegations from Woodlawn Avenue and Harper Lane visited to study the planters, the lighting design, and the council's meeting structure. At year's end, on a crisp autumn evening, the council organized a harvest lantern release. Neighbors inscribed wishes and thanks on small paper lanterns, then released them onto heated air currents along the street. As the lanterns drifted skyward, the crowd stood hushed, faces illuminated by their gentle glow. Alice stepped forward to speak. She thanked everyone for their tenacity, the volunteers who had scrubbed graffiti at dawn, the attorneys who had documented each act of sabotage, the festival performers who had drawn families back to the block. She reminded them that the work was never finished, that true revitalization was a living, breathing process requiring care, vigilance, and renewed commitment. The final lantern ascended into the night, a silent seal on Brooklyn Street's transformation from a derelict block to a vibrant corridor of community life. As the last flicker of light disappeared into the sky, Alice looked at the faces around her, young and old, black, white and brown, and felt the full measure of their achievement. What had begun as a battle against sabotage had become a testament to unity, resilience, and the power of neighbors to reclaim their home. And in that moment, Brooklyn Street was more than a street once marked by decay. It was a living legacy of what happens when a community brightens its own path.